The dust kicked up around Zelda Zimmerman's boots as she hammered the final nail into the wooden sign that read Zimmerman Legal Services in bold black letters, and the silence that fell over Willits, California's main street that September morning in 1883 was so thick you could have cut it with a Bowie knife. She had arrived 3 days earlier on the stagecoach from San Francisco, a 23-year-old woman with a law degree tucked into her leather satchel and determination burning in her hazel eyes. The townsfolk had watched her rent the small office next to the general store with expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright hostility. Women in Willits were seamstresses, school teachers, or wives. They were not lawyers. Zelda stepped back to admire her work, brushing a strand of dark auburn hair from her face. The sign looked professional, exactly what she needed to establish herself in this frontier town. She had chosen Willits specifically because it was growing, because it needed legal representation that was not corrupt or bought by the railroad companies that were beginning to snake their way through Northern California. "You are making a fool of yourself, Miss Zimmerman." She turned to find Horace Pemberton standing behind her, his considerable belly straining against his vest buttons. He was the town's only other lawyer, a man who had made his fortune representing the interests of cattle barons and railroad magnates, while the common people struggled to keep their land. "That is Mrs. Zimmerman, actually," Zelda said calmly, though her heart was racing. "I am a widow." It was not entirely a lie. She had been engaged once to a promising young attorney in San Francisco. He had died of pneumonia 2 weeks before their wedding. She wore his ring on her finger still, a simple gold band that gave her a measure of respectability in polite society. Horace's face reddened. "Widow or not, you should know your place. Law is a man's profession. These people will not trust you with their business." "Then they are free to take their business to you," Zelda replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I suspect they might appreciate having a choice?" She turned and walked into her office, shutting the door firmly behind her. Her hands were shaking. She had expected resistance, but the reality of facing it down was more difficult than she had imagined during all those months of study and preparation. The office was small but serviceable. She had spent the previous 2 days scrubbing every surface, arranging her law books on the shelves she had purchased from the carpenter, and setting up a desk with 2 chairs for clients. Everything she owned in the world was in this room or in her boarding house lodgings down the street. The morning passed slowly. No one came. Zelda tried to occupy herself by reviewing California property law, but she found herself watching the street through her window instead. People passed by, glancing at her sign with expressions of curiosity or disapproval. A group of women stood across the street, whispering behind their hands and casting looks in her direction. Around noon, the door finally opened. Zelda looked up hopefully, but it was only Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, bringing her a lunch pail. "Thought you might be hungry," the older woman said kindly. She was one of the few people in Willits who had treated Zelda with any warmth. "Do not let them get to you, dear. This town has its ways, but ways can change." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means more than you know." After the landlady left, Zelda ate her lunch mechanically, tasting nothing. She was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps she should have stayed in San Francisco, where at least there were other professional women, where her ambitions would not have seemed so outlandish. The afternoon brought no clients either. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Zelda decided to close up for the day. She was locking her door when she heard raised voices coming from the direction of the saloon. "I am telling you, that land is mine. My family has worked it for 15 years. And I am telling you that the deed says otherwise. You have until the end of the week to clear out." Zelda recognized the second voice as belonging to Horace Pemberton. She walked toward the commotion, drawn by the desperation in the first man's tone. A small crowd had gathered outside the saloon. In the center stood a young Mexican farmer, his hat clutched in his hands, facing down Horace and 2 men Zelda did not recognize. They wore expensive suits and had the hard eyes of men accustomed to getting their way. "Please, senor," the farmer was saying, "my wife, she is expecting our second child. Where will we go?" That is not my concern, Horace said coldly. The railroad needs that land for their new line. They have made a very generous offer to purchase it from the rightful owners. But I am the rightful owner. Do you have papers to prove it? The farmer's face fell. My father, he bought the land with a handshake. The man who sold it to us, he is dead now. Then you have no claim. Good day. Horace turned to walk away, but Zelda stepped forward before she could think better of it. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying across the street. But California law recognizes adverse possession. If this man and his family have openly occupied and improved the land for 15 years, he may have legal claim to it regardless of whether he holds the original deed. Every eye turned to her. The silence was deafening. Horace's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Miss Zimmerman, this is none of your concern. It is if he wishes to hire me as his attorney. The farmer looked at her with sudden hope blazing in his dark eyes. You would help me, Senora? If you want my help, yes. One of the suited men stepped forward. The railroad has already purchased this land from the family of the previous owner. This is a done deal. Not if the sale was invalid due to prior claim, Zelda said. She was aware that her heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. I will need to examine the documents, of course, and research the specific circumstances, but I believe your client may have acted prematurely. This is absurd, Horace sputtered. Diego, do not let this woman fill your head with false hope. She does not know what she is talking about. I graduated top of my class from Hastings College of the Law, Zelda said quietly. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Diego looked between them, uncertainty written across his weathered face. Then he drew himself up straight. I will hire you, Senora Zimmerman. I cannot pay much, but I will pay what I can. We will discuss terms in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. As the crowd began to disperse, muttering amongst themselves, Zelda became aware of someone watching her from the edge of the group. He was a cowboy, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a battered hat, dusty chaps, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips. But it was the way he looked at her that made her breath catch, not with hostility or disapproval, but with something that looked remarkably like respect. He tipped his hat to her as their eyes met, then turned and walked away, his spurs jingling softly with each step. That night, Zelda lay awake in her boarding house room, simultaneously exhilarated and terrified by what she had done. She had taken on powerful enemies on her very first day. The railroad companies were ruthless, and they had the money to drag out legal proceedings for years. But Diego's desperate face kept appearing in her mind. If she was going to be a lawyer, she needed to be a lawyer who fought for people who needed her, not for those who could afford to buy whatever outcome they desired. The next morning, Diego arrived at her office exactly at 9, hat in hand. He brought with him a leather pouch containing what papers he had: his father's Bible with the family records, and testimony from neighbors who had known his family for years. Zelda listened carefully, taking notes in her neat script, asking questions to clarify the timeline. My father, he came here in 1868, Diego explained. The man who sold him the land, Mr. William Foster, he was old and sick. He had no children, no family. He wanted to go back east to die near his sister. My father paid him fairly, but they did not go to a lawyer. They shook hands, and Mr. Foster gave my father a letter saying the land was his. But that letter, it was lost in a fire 3 years ago when part of our barn burned. Do you have witnesses who saw this letter? 3 of our neighbors saw it. They will testify. Zelda made a note. And you have lived on and farmed this land continuously since 1868? Every day. We built a house, we planted orchards, we raised animals. Everyone knows it is our land. Everyone except the railroad, Zelda murmured. She looked up at Diego. I will be honest with you. This will not be easy. The railroad has resources we do not have. But I believe we have a strong case under the doctrine of adverse possession. If we can prove continuous occupation and improvement of the land for 15 years with the original owner's consent, the subsequent sale to the railroad may be invalid. Diego's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Senora. Thank you for believing me." "I believe in the law," Zelda said, "and the law should protect people like you." Over the next 2 weeks, Zelda threw herself into preparing Diego's case. She interviewed his neighbors, researched property records at the county seat in Ukiah, and drafted a detailed legal argument. The work was consuming, and she barely noticed that the rest of the town still treated her with cold suspicion. She was returning from the county courthouse on a Thursday afternoon, her satchel heavy with copied documents, when she found her office door standing open. Her heart sank. She had locked it carefully that morning. Inside, the office had been ransacked. Her law books had been pulled from the shelves and scattered across the floor, some with pages torn out. Her desk drawers had been emptied, papers strewn everywhere. On her desk, someone had left a note in crude block letters. "Go back to San Francisco before you get hurt." Zelda stood in the doorway, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Figured you might need some help." She spun around. The cowboy from the street that first day stood behind her, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see that he was perhaps 25 or 26 with a strong jaw and a small scar above his left eyebrow. His eyes were kind. "I'm sorry, I do not believe we have met," Zelda said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Name is Samuel Foster, but everyone calls me Sam. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch, about 5 miles north of town." He looked past her into the destroyed office. "Heard about what happened. Saw some men leaving in a hurry about an hour ago. Thought I would come check on you." "That is very kind, but I can manage." "Did not say you could not, just offering an extra pair of hands." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was no condescension there, no assumption that she needed rescuing because she was a woman. Just a straightforward offer of help. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." They worked together in silence for a while, picking up books and papers, trying to restore some order to the chaos. Sam was careful with the law books, handling them like they were precious, even though Zelda suspected he had never opened a law book in his life. "Can I ask you something?" Sam said after a while. "Of course." "Why did you come here? To Willits, I mean. You could have stayed in the city where folks might be more accepting of a woman lawyer." Zelda paused in gathering scattered papers. "Because in San Francisco, all the good cases go to the established firms. I would have spent my career writing briefs for senior partners and never setting foot in a courtroom. Here I can actually practice law. I can help people who need help." Sam nodded slowly. "That is a good reason." "Why do you ask?" "Because I think what you are doing is brave, and I think Diego is lucky to have you fighting for him." Zelda felt warmth spread through her chest. It was the first real support she had received from anyone in this town besides Mrs. Henderson. "You knew Mr. William Foster, the man who sold Diego's father the land?" "He was my grandfather," Sam said quietly. "Foster is my middle name. My last name is Fletcher." Zelda stared at him. "Your grandfather?" "My mother's father. I was just a boy when he sold that land and went back to Philadelphia, but I remember him talking about the Mexican family he sold it to. He liked them. Said they would take good care of the place." Sam looked at her steadily. "That land belongs to Diego. My grandfather wanted him to have it. The fact that some distant cousins I have never even met sold it to the railroad does not change that." "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" "Yes, madam. Already planned to offer once I heard what was going on." They finished straightening the office as the sun began to set. When everything was as organized as it could be, Sam lingered in the doorway. "Miss Zimmerman, I know you can take care of yourself, but these railroad men, they play rough. You should be careful." "I will be, and thank you, Mr. Fletcher, for helping today and for being willing to testify." "It is the right thing to do." He hesitated, then added, "And please, call me Sam. Mr. Fletcher makes me feel like my father." "Then you should call me Zelda." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good night, Zelda." "Good night, Sam." After he left, Zelda locked her office door and walked back to the boarding house in the gathering darkness. Her office had been vandalized, she had received threats, and the whole town seemed to think she was either foolish or dangerous. But for the first time since arriving in Willits, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. The preliminary hearing for Diego's case was scheduled for the following Monday at the county courthouse. Zelda spent the weekend preparing her arguments and coaching Diego and his witnesses. Sam came by on Sunday afternoon to go over his testimony. They sat in her office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and Zelda asked him questions while taking notes on his answers. "You're very good at this," Sam said when they finished. "Asking questions, I mean. You make it easy to explain things clearly." "That is the job," Zelda said, but she was pleased by the compliment. A good lawyer knows how to help witnesses tell their story. "The town is talking about you, you know." "I imagine they are. Nothing good, I assume." "Some good," Sam said. "More than you might think. There are a lot of folks around here who have been pushed around by men like Horace Pemberton. They are starting to wonder if maybe you could help them too." "I hope I can," Zelda said softly. "That is why I am here." Sam stood to leave, then paused. "Zelda, I want you to know something. What the townsfolk say about you, about how you should know your place, it is wrong. Your place is wherever you choose. You have every right to be here, practicing law, helping people. Do not let anyone tell you different." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Zelda felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Thank you, Sam. That means a great deal to me." He tipped his hat and left, and Zelda sat alone in her office for a long time afterward, her hand pressed against her heart, wondering what was happening to her. Monday morning dawned clear and bright. Zelda dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a dark blue dress with a high collar and a tailored jacket. She pinned her hair up severely and checked her appearance in the small mirror in her room. She looked competent and serious, exactly the image she wanted to project. The journey to the county courthouse in Ukiah took 2 hours by stagecoach. Diego and his wife Rosa came, along with 3 of their neighbors who would serve as witnesses. Sam met them at the courthouse, looking uncomfortable in a suit instead of his usual work clothes. The hearing room was packed. Horace Pemberton sat at one table with 2 expensive lawyers from Sacramento who represented the railroad. They looked supremely confident, barely glancing at Zelda as she arranged her papers at the opposing table. The judge was a gray-haired man named Whitmore. Zelda had researched him carefully. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for following the letter of the law without much sympathy for emotional appeals. The railroad's lawyers went first, presenting their case with polished efficiency. They had documents showing that the land had originally been granted to the Foster family in 1855. When William Foster died in 1874, it had passed to his nephew in Pennsylvania. That nephew had recently sold it to the railroad for their new line. The sale was legal and binding, they argued. Diego Ruiz had no claim to the land. When it was Zelda's turn, she stood and walked to the front of the courtroom, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Your Honor, the railroad's position ignores a fundamental principle of California property law. Under the doctrine of adverse possession, a person who openly occupies and improves land for a continuous period of 15 years, with the original owner's permission, gains legal title to that land. Mr. Ruiz has met every requirement of this doctrine." She walked the judge through the timeline carefully, presenting testimony from Diego and his neighbors about the original sale in 1868, the continuous occupation and improvement of the land, and the fact that everyone in the community recognized the Ruiz family as the rightful owners. Then she called Sam to the stand. "Mr. Fletcher, what was your relationship to William Foster?" "He was my grandfather, madam, my mother's father." "Did you ever hear him speak about the sale of the land in question to Mr. Ruiz's father?" "Yes, madam, many times. He said he was glad to sell it to a good family who would care for it. He said they paid him fairly and that he was happy with the arrangement." "Did he ever express any doubt about the validity of that sale?" "No, madam. He considered it a done deal." The railroad's lawyers tried to shake Sam's testimony on cross-examination, but he remained calm and consistent. When he stepped down, Zelda saw Horace Pemberton's face was troubled. Judge Whitmore called for a brief recess to consider the arguments. Zelda sat at her table, trying not to let her nervousness show. Diego reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, Senora, thank you for fighting for us." When the judge returned, his face was grave. This is a complex case involving competing property claims. However, after reviewing the testimony and the law, I find that the plaintiff has presented credible evidence of adverse possession. The original sale from William Foster to Mr. Ruiz's father, while informal, was a legitimate transaction. The subsequent occupation and improvement of the land for 15 years gives Mr. Ruiz a valid claim under California law. I am issuing a preliminary injunction preventing the railroad from taking possession of the disputed land pending a full trial. The railroad's lawyers erupted in protest, but Zelda barely heard them. She had won. It was only a preliminary ruling, not a final judgment, but it was a victory nonetheless. Outside the courthouse, Diego swept Zelda into an exuberant hug, tears streaming down his face. Rosa kissed her on both cheeks, babbling her thanks in Spanish. The neighbors clapped her on the back. And through it all, Zelda caught Sam's eye. He was standing a little apart from the group, smiling at her with an expression of such pride and warmth that it made her breath catch. The ride back to Willits was jubilant. Diego and his friends sang songs and told stories, but Zelda found herself sitting quietly, watching the passing landscape and thinking about the gray-eyed cowboy who had stood up for her when no one else would. Word of the preliminary hearing's outcome spread through Willits like wildfire. The next morning, Zelda arrived at her office to find 3 people waiting outside, all wanting to hire her for various legal matters. A widow who needed help settling her husband's estate, a farmer who was being cheated by a merchant, a young couple who wanted help buying land. Over the next few weeks, Zelda's practice began to grow. She worked long hours, often late into the night, but she loved every minute of it. She was doing exactly what she had dreamed of doing, using her education and skills to help people who needed her. Sam started coming by her office in the evenings after finishing his work at the ranch. At first, he would offer to walk her back to the boarding house so she would not be alone on the dark streets. Then he started bringing her dinner when she was working late. They would sit in her office and talk while she ate, conversations ranging from trivial matters to deeper discussions about justice, fairness, and what they wanted from life. Zelda found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit. Sam was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was educated despite his rough exterior, thoughtful, and possessed of a quiet strength that made her feel safe. And he treated her as an equal, never suggesting that her ambitions were foolish or that she should want something different. One evening in late October, they were sitting in her office as usual. The air had grown cooler, and Zelda had lit a fire in the small stove. Outside, rain pattered against the windows. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sam said. Zelda looked up from the contract she was reviewing. "Of course." "The ring you wear. You said you were a widow, but I have never heard you speak of your husband." Zelda's hand automatically went to the gold band on her finger. She had not talked about James in months. "I was engaged, actually, not married. James was his name. He died before we could have the wedding." "I'm sorry, that must have been terrible." "It was. I loved him very much." She paused, then continued softly. "But I think he would have wanted me to keep living, to pursue my dreams. He supported my desire to practice law when many men would not have." "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Zelda met Sam's eyes across the desk. "What about you? Is there a woman waiting for you somewhere?" "No, there was someone years ago, but she married a rancher from Oregon. Wanted a man who could give her a big house and social position. That was never going to be me." "Why not?" "Because I'm a cowboy, Zelda. I work with my hands. I am good at what I do, but I will never be rich. I will never be the kind of man who wears a suit every day and has his name on a bank account that matters." He looked at her intently. "But I am honest, and I work hard, and I figure that ought to count for something." "It counts for a great deal," Zelda said quietly. The silence that fell between them was charged with something unspoken. Zelda's heart was racing. She knew what she was feeling, had known for weeks now, but acknowledging it felt dangerous. Sam stood abruptly. "I should let you get back to work." "Sam, wait." Zelda stood too. "I want you to know that I value your friendship more than I can say." "Just friendship?" The words were soft, almost hesitant. Zelda's mouth went dry. She knew she should say yes, should keep things professional and proper, but she was tired of always doing what she should do. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not know what this is." Sam crossed the room until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint freckles across his nose, the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. "I think you do know," he said. "I think you have known for a while, same as me." "Sam, I cannot. My practice is just starting. If people knew that I was involved with someone, they might think I am not serious about my work, or they might think you are a woman with a full life who happens to also be an excellent lawyer." "You do not understand. Women are not allowed to want both. We are supposed to choose." "Then choose," Sam said. "But choose what you actually want, Zelda, not what the townsfolk think you should want." He left before she could respond, and Zelda stood alone in her office, her hands shaking, her heart full of longing and confusion. She tried to focus on her work, but it was impossible. Her mind kept returning to Sam, to the way he looked at her, to the things he had said. She had spent so long fighting to establish herself, to prove that she was capable and serious. Getting involved with someone could complicate everything, but oh, how she wanted to. The full trial for Diego's case was scheduled for December. As the date approached, the railroad increased its pressure. Zelda received more threatening letters. Someone threw a rock through her office window. There were rumors that the railroad was bringing in lawyers from San Francisco, the best money could buy. Through it all, Sam was there. He fixed her window, installed a better lock on her door, and made sure she was never alone when walking the streets after dark. He did not press her about their conversation that rainy evening, but the awareness hung between them, a constant undercurrent to everything they said and did. The morning of the trial, Zelda woke with her stomach in knots. She dressed carefully and pinned her hair, then stood looking at herself in the mirror. She looked professional and competent. She looked like a lawyer. But when she looked at her reflection, she also saw a woman who was lonely, a woman who had sacrificed so much in pursuit of her dreams that she had forgotten she was allowed to want more than just professional success. She touched the gold band on her finger, thinking of James. What would he have wanted for her? Not a life alone, surely. Not a life where she denied herself happiness out of fear of what others might think. The trial was held in Willits this time, in the small courthouse on the edge of town. The room was packed with spectators. Zelda saw friendly faces among the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, Diego, and Rosa, several of her other clients, and Sam, sitting in the back row, watching her with steady confidence. The railroad's lawyers were every bit as formidable as she had feared. They were polished and experienced, presenting their case with the kind of smooth efficiency that came from years of courtroom victories. They argued that adverse possession did not apply because William Foster's nephew had never consented to the sale. They brought in a handwriting expert to suggest that documents had been forged. They painted Diego as an opportunist trying to steal land that did not belong to him. Zelda fought back with everything she had. She presented testimony from Diego's neighbors, from Sam, from a priest who had known the Ruiz family for years. She cited case law and precedent. She argued that justice required protecting families who had acted in good faith and built their lives on land they believed was rightfully theirs. The trial lasted 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Judge Whitmore delivered his verdict. This court finds that the evidence supports Mr. Ruiz's claim of adverse possession. The sale from William Foster to Mr. Ruiz's father in 1868, while informal, was a legitimate transaction. The subsequent continuous occupation and improvement of the land for 15 years establishes clear title. The railroad's purchase from William Foster's nephew is invalid, as the nephew did not hold clear title to the property. The land belongs to Mr. Ruiz and his family. The courtroom erupted. Diego was crying openly, hugging his wife and neighbors. Horace Pemberton looked stunned. The railroad lawyers were already gathering their papers, no doubt planning an appeal, but for now, Zelda had won. She stood at her table, feeling dizzy with relief and triumph. She had done it. She had taken on powerful interests and won. She had proven that she belonged here, that she could practice law every bit as well as any man. Outside the courthouse, Diego tried to press money into her hands, but Zelda refused to take more than a token payment. You need that money for your family. Pay me when the harvest comes in. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Someone organized a party at Diego's farm, with food and music and dancing. Zelda found herself swept up in it, laughing and talking and accepting congratulations from people who just weeks ago had treated her with cold suspicion. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the farmyard, Zelda slipped away from the crowd, needing a moment of quiet. She walked to the edge of Diego's orchard, looking out over the land she had fought to protect. The trees were heavy with fruit, the fields green and productive. This was what she had wanted, to make a real difference in people's lives. You did a good thing today. She turned to find Sam standing behind her. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves despite the cool evening air. We did a good thing, Zelda corrected. I could not have won without your testimony. You would have found a way. You are the most determined person I have ever met. He moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out over the darkening fields. Zelda, I know this is not the right time, and maybe there will never be a right time, but I need to say this. I am in love with you. Zelda's breath caught. She had known, of course, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way it had not been before. I know you have your work, Sam continued, and I know you have fought hard to establish yourself here. I am not asking you to give any of that up. I would never ask you to give that up. But I am asking if maybe there could be room in your life for me too. For us. Zelda turned to face him fully. In the soft light of the distant lanterns, his face was open and vulnerable. I'm afraid, she whispered. I'm afraid that if I let myself want this, everything I have built will fall apart. Why would it fall apart? Because women are not supposed to have everything. We are supposed to choose between being wives and having careers. The townsfolk already think I am too ambitious, too unwomanly. If they think I am distracted by romance, they will stop trusting me with their legal matters. Sam reached out and gently took her hand. The townsfolk said you should know your place. They said a woman has no business being a lawyer. They said you would fail. And you proved every single one of them wrong. He squeezed her hand. Your place is wherever you choose, Zelda. Maybe that is in a courtroom. Maybe that is here with me. Maybe it is both. But it is your choice, and no one else gets to tell you what you can or cannot have. Tears blurred Zelda's vision. I am in love with you too. I have been for weeks. I just did not want to admit it. Why not? Because admitting it means risking everything. No, Sam said softly. Admitting it means choosing to really live instead of just fighting all the time. He pulled her into his arms, and Zelda let herself lean into his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her cheek. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something inside her relax. She was so tired of fighting, of proving herself, of being strong every single moment of every single day. I do not know how to do this, she whispered, how to be a lawyer and a woman in love. I do not know either, but I figure we can work it out together. They stood there for a long time, holding each other while music and laughter drifted across the fields. When they finally walked back to the party hand in hand, Zelda felt like something fundamental had shifted. She was still a lawyer. She was still determined to build her practice and help people who needed her. But she was also a woman who was allowed to want love and companionship and a future that included more than just her work. The news that Zelda and Sam were courting spread through Willits quickly. To Zelda's surprise, the reaction was not as negative as she had feared. Some people tutted and gossiped, certainly, but others seemed pleased. Mrs. Henderson beamed every time she saw them together. Diego and Rosa invited them to dinner at the farm. Even some of Zelda's clients expressed their approval. About time someone made an honest woman of you, one elderly farmer said with a wink, and Zelda had to laugh. Over the winter months, their relationship deepened. Sam would come by her office in the evenings, and they would walk together through the town, talking about their days. On Sundays, they would go riding in the hills above Willits, and Sam would point out landmarks and tell her stories about the land. Zelda found that she loved hearing about his work, about the ranch and the cattle and the rhythm of a life tied to the seasons. In return, she told him about her cases, about the law, about her dreams of building something lasting in this frontier town. Sam listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and offering perspective that sometimes helped her see problems in new ways. In February, the railroad filed an appeal of Judge Whitmore's ruling. Zelda spent weeks preparing her response, but she was confident. The law was on her side, and she had a strong record from the trial. When the appellate court upheld the lower court's decision in March, Diego's land was finally permanently secure. The victory brought Zelda more clients. People from neighboring towns began seeking her out, traveling to Willits specifically to hire the lawyer who had beaten the railroad. Her practice grew so busy that she had to hire a clerk to help with the paperwork. Through it all, Sam was her anchor. He never seemed threatened by her success or resentful of the time she devoted to her work. Instead, he celebrated her victories and comforted her when cases did not go as planned. He made her laugh when she was too serious and reminded her to eat when she got lost in legal research. On a warm evening in late April, they were walking along the creek that ran through town. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh grass. Willits was beautiful in the spring, the hills green and lush after the winter rains. Sam had been quieter than usual all evening, and Zelda kept giving him curious looks. Finally, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "Zelda, I have been thinking about something for a while now." "What is it?" "I want to marry you." Zelda's heart began to race. "Sam, I know it is soon. We have only been courting for a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He took both her hands in his. "I love you. I love your passion and your intelligence and your courage. I love the way you fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. I love everything about you." "I love you too," Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. "But Sam, marriage changes things. If we marry, legally everything I own becomes yours. My practice, my money, everything. Then we will go to San Francisco and find a lawyer who can draw up papers saying it all stays yours. I do not want your property, Zelda. I just want you. What if people say I'm not a serious lawyer once I am married? What if they stop hiring me? Then they are fools, and they do not deserve your representation. But I do not think that will happen. You have proven yourself in this town. You have proven you can do anything you set your mind to." Zelda looked at the man standing before her, this good, honest, supportive man who loved her exactly as she was and never asked her to be anything different. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Sam's face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Zelda felt happiness bubble up inside her like champagne. They were married in June in a small ceremony at the church in Willits. Mrs. Henderson helped Zelda choose a dress, a beautiful cream-colored gown with lace sleeves. Diego and Rosa stood up as witnesses. Half the town attended, and if there were some who disapproved, they were drowned out by those who celebrated. True to his word, Sam had arranged for a lawyer in San Francisco to draw up papers ensuring that Zelda retained control of her property and her practice even after marriage. It was unusual, but not unheard of, and it gave Zelda peace of mind. After the wedding, they moved into a small house on the edge of town. It had a front room that Zelda could use as an office when she wanted to work from home, and a porch that overlooked the hills. Sam continued working at the Triple Bar Ranch, and Zelda continued building her law practice. Their life together was not always easy. There were still people in Willits who thought Zelda was too bold, too ambitious, too unwilling to know her place. There were cases she lost, clients who disappointed her, and long days when she came home exhausted and discouraged. But there was Sam, always there with steady support and unconditional love. He never made her feel guilty for the hours she devoted to her work. He learned to cook decent meals and took pride in keeping their home comfortable. He listened to her talk about legal minutiae that must have bored him senseless, and he offered insights that came from his different perspective on the world. In return, Zelda learned about ranching and cattle and the land that Sam loved. She rode with him when she could, feeling herself relax in the open spaces, away from law books and courtrooms. She learned to appreciate the rhythm of a life that followed the seasons rather than court schedules. A year after their wedding, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She worried about how pregnancy and motherhood would affect her practice. Would clients still trust her? Would she be able to keep up with the demands of her work? Sam held her while she cried out her fears, then looked her in the eye and said, "You are going to be an amazing mother, and you are still going to be an amazing lawyer. Women have been doing both since the beginning of time. You will figure it out." Their son was born in early spring of 1886, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, after Sam's father. Zelda took a month away from her practice, but then she was back, working reduced hours with Thomas sleeping in a cradle in her office. Mrs. Henderson helped with childcare, as did Rosa, and gradually Zelda found her new rhythm. It was not easy. There were sleepless nights and days when she felt torn between her son's needs and her client's demands, but there was also profound joy in building this life that included both her career and her family. When Thomas was 6 months old, Zelda won a major case against a mining company that was polluting local water sources. The victory brought her regional recognition and even more clients. She had to hire a second clerk and began training a young woman who wanted to study law. Seeing another woman's eyes light up with the same passion Zelda had felt years ago was one of her greatest satisfactions. As Thomas grew, he became a fixture in Zelda's office. The townsfolk grew accustomed to seeing her walking down Main Street with legal briefs in one hand and her son's hand in the other. She was no longer a curiosity or a scandal. She was simply Zelda Fletcher, the town lawyer, a wife and mother who happened to also be very good at her job. 2 years after Thomas was born, Zelda had a daughter they named Grace. Sam was besotted with his children, spending every free moment playing with them and telling them stories. He taught Thomas to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he was equally devoted to Grace when she came along. The years passed in a blur of court cases and family dinners, of legal victories and scraped knees, of long conversations with Sam on their porch after the children were asleep. Zelda's practice continued to grow. She took on an associate, a young man fresh from law school who was eager to learn from her. Together they handled cases throughout the region, building a reputation for honesty and skill. Sam eventually became foreman of the Triple Bar Ranch, a position that came with more responsibility but also more respect and better pay. He was good at managing men and understood cattle and land in a way that made the ranch prosper. The owner trusted him completely, and Sam took pride in his work. By 1895, Zelda and Sam had been married for nearly a decade. Thomas was 9 years old, Grace was 7, and Zelda had just discovered she was pregnant again. This news was less frightening than the first time. She knew now that she could manage both her career and her family. She had proven it to herself and to everyone else. One evening that summer, they were sitting on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside getting ready for bed. Sam reached over and took Zelda's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying in Willits, I mean. You could have gone somewhere bigger, built an even more successful practice." Zelda thought about it seriously before answering. "No, I do not regret it. I have exactly the life I wanted. I have work that matters, a family I love, and a community that respects me. What more could I ask for? I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am? Are you?" "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sam said. He squeezed her hand. "You know, when you first came to Willits, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing up there in front of everyone, refusing to back down even when the whole town was against you." "I was terrified." "I know. But you did it anyway. And you changed this town. You changed me." "You changed me too," Zelda said softly. "You taught me that I did not have to choose between being a lawyer and having a full life. You showed me that the right person would support my dreams rather than asking me to give them up." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. Somewhere inside, they heard Thomas laughing at something Grace had said. The sound filled Zelda with contentment. "The townsfolk used to say I should know my place," Zelda said. "Do you remember?" "I remember. And I remember telling you that your place was wherever you chose." "I chose well," Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I chose this town, this work, this life with you. And I would choose it all over again." Their third child, another boy they named William, was born that winter. Unlike his siblings, William was a quiet, thoughtful baby who seemed content to observe the world rather than conquer it. Zelda adored all three of her children, marveling at how different they were from each other. As the children grew, Zelda made sure they understood that they could be anything they wanted to be. She told Grace that being a girl did not mean she had to limit her ambitions, and she made sure Thomas and William understood that women were just as capable as men. She wanted her children to grow up in a world that was more accepting than the one she had fought her way through. In 1898, Zelda argued a case before the California Supreme Court. It was a voting rights case, and though she lost, the experience was extraordinary. To stand before the highest court in the state and present her arguments was the culmination of everything she had worked toward. When she returned to Willits, the town threw a celebration in her honor. Even people who had once opposed her presence acknowledged what an achievement it was for their small town to have a lawyer who argued before the state's highest court. Horace Pemberton, now elderly and long retired, sought her out at the celebration. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, using her maiden name, as he always had, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. You have been an asset to this community, and I am sorry I did not see that from the beginning." Zelda was gracious in accepting his apology, but privately she thought that she had nothing to prove to him anymore. She had spent too many years caring what people like Horace thought of her. Now she knew her own worth, and that was enough. The new century brought changes to Willits. The town grew larger, more prosperous. Electric lights appeared on Main Street. The railroad that had once tried to take Diego's land now brought commerce and visitors. Zelda's children grew from babies to young people with personalities and ambitions of their own. Thomas, at 16, announced he wanted to study law like his mother. Zelda's heart swelled with pride, even as she warned him how difficult the path would be. Grace, at 14, was already showing talent as a writer and talked about becoming a journalist. William, at 12, loved working with his father at the ranch and seemed destined to follow in Sam's footsteps. In 1904, 21 years after she had first arrived in Willits, Zelda was asked to speak at the opening of California's newest law school. She stood before a room full of young aspiring lawyers, including several women, and told them her story. "When I came to Willits in 1883, she said, I was told I should know my place. That law was not a profession for women, that I would fail. But I had a dream, and I had the education and determination to pursue it. More importantly, I had people who supported me, my clients who trusted me when no one else would, my friends who stood by me, and my husband who taught me that I did not have to choose between my career and a full life." She looked out at the young faces watching her intently. "You will face obstacles. Some of you will face more obstacles than others simply because of who you are. But I want you to remember this. Your place is wherever you choose. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot do something simply because it has not been done before. Do not let anyone convince you that you must limit your dreams to fit their expectations. Work hard, fight for justice, and never apologize for being ambitious." The applause was thunderous. After her speech, several young women came up to thank her, telling her that she had inspired them to pursue law despite family opposition or societal pressure. Zelda hugged each one, remembering herself at their age, full of determination and hope and fear. That evening she returned to Willits on the train. Sam met her at the station with the wagon, just as he had done countless times over the years. He was 50 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes were as warm as ever when he looked at her. "How did it go?" he asked, as they drove home through the familiar streets. "It went well. I think I may have convinced a few young women that they can do this." "Of course you did. You are proof that it can be done." At home, their children were waiting with a celebratory dinner they had prepared themselves. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. As Zelda looked around the table at her family, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had built. After dinner, she and Sam sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. The night was warm, full of the sounds of crickets and distant cattle. Willits stretched out below them, lights twinkling in windows. "Do you remember the first time we sat on this porch?" Sam asked. "Of course. It was right after we moved in. I was so nervous about everything, about being married, about whether I could balance everything." "You have done more than balance. You have built something extraordinary." Zelda leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "We built it together. I could not have done any of this without you." "You could have, but I'm glad you did not have to." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had learned each other so well over the years that words were often unnecessary. Zelda thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Willits with nothing but a law degree and determination. She thought about all the battles she had fought, all the cases she had won and lost, all the times she had wanted to give up but had kept going. Most of all, she thought about the cowboy who had looked at her that first day and seen not a woman who needed to know her place, but a woman who had every right to choose her own path. "Sam," she said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing in me, for loving me, for building this life with me." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for choosing me, for letting me be part of your extraordinary life." The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up a full life. There were weddings as their children grew up and started families of their own. Thomas did become a lawyer, eventually joining his mother's practice. Grace became a journalist, writing for newspapers in Sacramento and San Francisco. William took over as foreman of the Triple Bar Ranch when Sam finally retired at 60. There were grandchildren, a whole new generation that Zelda and Sam delighted in spoiling. They told the grandchildren stories about the old days, about how Willits had changed, about the battles their grandmother had fought to establish herself. In 1920, when women finally gained the right to vote, Zelda stood in line at the polling place with tears streaming down her face. She thought of all the women who had fought for this moment, all the sacrifices made. She cast her ballot proudly, remembering the young woman she had been who had dared to dream of being taken seriously in a man's world. Sam stood beside her, holding her hand, as proud of her in that moment as he had been the day she won her first case. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps becoming slower. But the love between them never dimmed. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. Zelda continued practicing law until she was 72, finally retiring when her eyesight began to fail. By then, her practice had evolved into a respected firm that employed 6 lawyers, including Thomas and 2 other women she had mentored. She had argued dozens of cases before appellate courts and had been instrumental in shaping property and civil rights law in Northern California. But when people asked her about her greatest accomplishment, she did not talk about her legal victories. She talked about the life she had built, the family she had raised, the community she had served. "I proved that a woman could be a lawyer," she would say. "But more importantly, I proved that a woman could be many things at once: a lawyer, a wife, a mother, a friend. The townsfolk said I should know my place. My husband taught me that my place was wherever I chose, and I chose all of it." On a spring evening in 1928, Zelda and Sam sat on their porch watching yet another sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. They were both in their 80s now, their children grown with families of their own, their grandchildren starting to have children. "Do you think we made a difference, Corey?" Zelda asked. It was a question she had asked before, in moments of doubt or reflection. "Yes," Sam said without hesitation. "We made a difference. You made a difference. Look at this town, Zelda. Look at what you built." She looked out over Willits, so different from the rough frontier town where she had arrived 45 years earlier. It was modern now, prosperous, civilized. And it was a town where women owned businesses and served on the town council, where girls grew up believing they could be anything they wanted. "I could not have done it without you," she said, as she had said so many times over the years. "We did it together," Sam replied, as he always did. That night, lying in bed beside her husband of more than 40 years, Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, all the fears she had faced and overcome, all the battles she had fought and won, all the love she had found when she had thought her heart was closed forever. She had taken a risk on that September morning in 1883 when she had hung her sign and declared herself a lawyer. She had taken an even bigger risk when she had allowed herself to fall in love with a cowboy who saw her not as she was supposed to be, but as she truly was. Both risks had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. "I love you, Sam Fletcher," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Zelda Fletcher," he whispered back. "Always have, always will." They fell asleep holding hands, just as they had done for more than 40 years. Two people who had chosen each other, who had built a life together, who had proven that love and ambition were not mutually exclusive, but could enrich and strengthen each other. The next morning dawned bright and clear, full of promise. Zelda woke to find Sam still sleeping beside her, his face peaceful. She lay there watching him for a long moment, counting her blessings, grateful for every day they had shared. When he finally opened his eyes and smiled at her, she smiled back, as much in love with him as she had been that first moment when he had stood up for her in front of the whole town. "Good morning, my love," she said. "Good morning," he replied. "What shall we do today?" "Whatever we choose," Zelda said. "Our place is wherever we choose, remember?" Sam laughed, that warm, rich laugh she had loved for 45 years. "I remember. I will never forget." They rose and dressed, then walked together down to the kitchen where their daughter Grace was already making coffee. She had come to visit with her own grandchildren, filling the house with noise and life and joy. As Zelda sat at the table surrounded by family, sipping coffee and listening to her great-grandchildren's laughter, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had lived the life she wanted. She had made a difference in the world. She had loved and been loved in return. The townsfolk had said she should know her place. A cowboy had said her place was wherever she chose. She had chosen wisely. She had chosen love and work and family and justice. She had chosen to fight for what she believed in while also fighting for her own happiness. She had chosen Sam, and he had chosen her, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, Zelda Fletcher looked around at her family and her life and knew with absolute certainty that she had no regrets. She had lived exactly as she wanted on her own terms in the place she had chosen, and it had been from beginning to end a life well lived.